Tom, why do you want to kick off today? Where do you want to go with this? We want to talk about Bill C-5?
I think we should start there because
Okay.
people are going to be hearing a lot about it over the weekend. Parliament is finishing off. It's the last day, but it could go very late. This is the bill that Mark Carney has made his statement after the campaign. He had promised that he was going to dream big for Canada and actually start getting stuff done. So he has said that he wants to have one economy for this country, not 13. In other words, not the 10 provinces and the 3 territories. We're going to start getting rid of interprovincial barriers to trade. We're going to start harmonizing rules. And yes, we're going to make it easier to do a proper evaluation of a project and actually find out very rapidly whether the thing can go through or not. Now, that's already got some people upset. I was saying, well, you haven't consulted enough on your bill. But if you look at the bill, all it says is you're going to have to follow all the rules, whether it's for First Nations, Inuit or Métis people, or whether it's with regard to the environment and sustainable development. But it's just going to be telescoped. You're not going to let these things drag on. And it's interesting because I do think that it was one of the things that Carney's going to have to be super careful about is the respect for Indigenous rights. But at the same time, sometimes my profession, lawyers, have learned the fine art of dragging out everything. And, they've used the Indigenous file as a way to often block projects. And at the end of the day, it could have been something that was a partnership, like we learned how to do with the James Bay Cree, with Hydro-Quebec. There are lots of different models that can be done to respect treaty rights and inherent rights of our First Peoples. But I do point a finger at my profession because they always try to make sure that the stalling tactics are in there and it's dragged out as long as possible. And that's why nothing was getting done in Canada. There's been one major project in the past 10 years under Trudeau. There was one pipeline on the West Coast that was built, but everything else is always ground down, whether it's a mining approval or anything else. So they're not saying that they're going to loosen the regulations or the rules. They just want to make sure that you can come to a doggone decision fast. And that's why Carney's pushing so hard. And he's got a great team around him, Aaron, that I think are going to be able to do just that.
Was there sort of not a recognition, Tom, at the outset when he first started talking about this or when it came up in the House that there would be pushback from Indigenous communities?
There will be. And I mean, I'm very sensitive to those rights and I've worked hard on them and I understand the concerns. But it can't be an excuse not even to get the legislation in place. And that's the difference. Trying to say that you haven't been consulted enough on a bill, Parliament is autonomous. It's sovereign. It makes its own decisions, and then the courts decide how to interpret and apply it in full respect of existing rights, in particular Indigenous rights. But the game was on right away. No, you're not even allowed to pass the law, even though you're the duly elected members of Parliament, because we're going to decide when we've had enough consultation. That's where I think that we almost get the example of why things are breaking down in Canada when you get that sort of argument.
Then there's the issue on these tariffs and the counter tariffs. And we talked earlier in the week. I remember we talked to a couple of analysts about this idea of that 30-day announcement coming out of the G7. Then the counter tariffs were proposed a couple of days ago as a way, I guess, to try to force the U.S. to understand that we're serious about this. But we haven't heard a whole lot going the other way. Is that reason for concern? No.
And I go back 2 weeks ago. I mean, it was on a Friday 2 weeks ago that we had the first indication about the increase from 25% to 50% on aluminum and steel.
Right.
And it was such a soft-stated response from Carney and from Melanie Joly, the industry minister. I scratched my head. I said, okay, obviously there's a backroom deal being made right now. That they're talking more than they're letting on. And that turned out to be the case. That's why Carney was so careful during the G7, because he doesn't want to upset the apple cart. But what he was signaling was important yesterday. First of all, the Steel Producers Association was about to hold a press conference with the United Steelworkers Union and say, tap their foot and say, come on, guys, what are you waiting for? You said you were going to be tough with the Americans. So Carney got out ahead of that, and it was smart. It was good strategy. He was able to get his points made, and his points were essentially, yes, we give ourselves 30 days, and yes, believe me, we've got a full suite of measures to respond if the Americans, don't want to come up with a deal. I think it's still the smartest way to play it, because if you poke the bear with Donald Trump, you could produce needless friction. And at this stage of the game, I think that cooler heads will prevail, and I think that Mark Carney's got a very cool head.
By the way, let me ask you with respect to Mark Carney, as you just said, having a cool head. I know I brought this up at the beginning of the week. We had, I think it was a Palace data poll showing that support for Mark Carney overall, but it turns out the Liberals as well, federally, is higher than it was for Justin Trudeau at the outset when he first became Prime Minister in 2015. I wonder what you think of that.
What I think is that he's doing exactly what he promised to do. he's putting in place. Let's look at the team, okay? Everybody knows about Michael Sabia. He was the CEO of Hydro-Quebec. He knows how to get things done. Funny story that was told to me by somebody who worked with them at Hydro. He would not hesitate to call a meeting at 5:30 on a Friday, knowing full well that his most senior officers wanted to be home like everybody else, but he would hold them in a meeting for a couple of hours, basically to remind them that they're getting a big fat paycheck because they've got responsibilities, and holding them to the responsibilities. He's in charge of the government. Carney is the head of government, but this guy is in charge of making it run. There's a ministry called the Privy Council Office, and he's the minister of that, even though he's not elected. And believe me, this guy's a tough taskmaker. Things are going to start to get shaken up because remember the throne speech. Massive cuts, massive reorganization without affecting service to the public. That can actually be done. But it's laziness. It's, the simply following along to get along. The civil service, the Trudeau years were just horrible in terms of the bloated civil service. We increased the size of the Canadian government by 40%. We were increasing government spending by 9% a year for 10 years under Justin Trudeau. It was impossible to sustain that. And spending was out of control. These guys are going to do their job. Another guy that you should know about, a Montrealer, Marc-André Blanchard, used to be the head of a very large firm, McCarthy's in Montreal, and then he became the national CEO of McCarthy's. He went on to become UN ambassador for Canada, and then he went on to become a senior guy at the Caisse de Dépôt. He was making $2 million a year. That was his published salary. Now he's taking probably a 75% pay cut to go and work for Mark Carney as his chief of staff, and he's used to dealing with people who have a high opinion of themselves, like senior lawyers and senior ministers. He's going to be delivering on one thing for Carney: results. And by the way, I'll go out on a limb. It's our last show before I come back in mid-August, but I'll tell you, I'll make a prediction that by Christmas, Carney will shuffle his cabinet because he's going to realize that he's got some underperformers in there, and he does. So he had to play along with the rules. You have to have this person from that region or from this group or so. Fine. But he's got some underperformers in his cabinet. He's going to shake it up. He is there to do something for Canada, to build up our economy, to increase our productivity. He's put in place the smartest people and the most experienced people in Canada, and they're all coming to him saying, I can get behind this guy. And I can actually help accomplish something.
Yeah.
That's why they're all signing up to be on Team Carney. And the public, Aaron, and everything I've been able to see, the public is totally on board with this guy. And by the way, he's shamelessly stealing some of the stuff that the Conservatives had promised to do. This whole idea of telescoping the review process for big projects, that was straight out of the playbook that was promised by Poilievre.
I will just add to one point to that, Tom, which is, and I get this, and I agree with you, and I think the Canadian public clearly is buying in. I wonder, though, one of the questions I asked when I first brought this up, asking if people agreed, it's, he sold sort of a grand plan, if you will, but in terms of actually, here's what I've done, here's a policy, it hasn't happened yet. How long do we have to give him for that to actually happen? We can come back say...
The fall.
Okay.
The stuff, they're going to get back to Sabia, any deputy minister who thought that they were heading off to the cottage for the summer, think again.
Out the window.
They're going to be working nonstop. And this is exactly what he's promised to do. And again, there are definitely incredible people in those senior government positions in Ottawa, and there are others who shouldn't be there at all. Wow. And guess what? They're going to get booted out.
Okay.
And this is the new world that we're. Trudeau understood certain things in terms of political communication. He was an expert at that. He didn't know a thing about how the government run. He had an unbelievably good chief of staff in Katie Telford, but her job was just to help him look good. And then basically the Privy Council office was always falling apart under Trudeau because nobody was taking care of it. Running the government side of it was not something that Trudeau was even interested in. This is why Carney wanted to get into government, was to run it properly in the public interest, wrestle the massive deficits that Trudeau had been racking up down to zero, which he's promised to do, and watch them go.
Tom, I will leave it at there, except I did want to ask you one last thing. Like, I have 30 seconds here. Marwa Risky is going to join me after the 5:30 news. And I'm just curious what you thought of that. Pablo Rodriguez wasting very little time in making a move. Good, bad, indifferent?
Well, I think that Pablo Rodriguez has a very clear mandate now. I mean, it was a much tighter race than people would have thought at the beginning. And, between Milliard and Blackburn, it was very close to decide who second place was. But he's in there fair and square. And I think that most of the people listening to us are, no matter who they backed during the leadership, if they were Liberals, now everybody is just saying we're all pushing in one direction, and it's got to be with Rodriguez. That's the signal I'm getting from everybody that I know, and I know a whole bunch who were in all three camps, and they're all saying, okay, everybody's on side. Let's just get this thing done.
And a clever move to appoint Marwa?
I think so, yeah. Yeah,
okay.
But say hi to her.
I will.
She's one of the smartest people.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we've ever had in Quebec politics, and it's an indication of just how tough it is to be in politics for everybody, but especially for women who still were underrepresented, but wind up still carrying much more burden than others. So I wish her all the best.
All right, Tom, you have a great summer. We will talk to you again in August, I guess.
Yes,
have
mid-August.
fun. Enjoy.